The Alpha King looked me in the eyes on our wedding day and said, "I reject this bond." 5 years later, my twin son smiled at the same man and called him father. The silence that followed felt louder than the cheers that had once celebrated a royal wedding. I had spent 5 years making sure that moment would never happen. Yet fate had ignored every promise I made to myself. My fingers tightened around the shopping bag as the boys laughed, completely unaware that the tall man frozen before them had once shattered our future with a single sentence. "Daddy, is he the knight from the picture?" Noah asked innocently. Before I could answer, Liam grinned at the stranger. "Father." The word slipped out because the old palace portrait hanging in every public building carried the same face. My heartbeat stopped. The Alpha King's expression changed in an instant. His eyes never left the boys. Royal guards surrounding him instinctively stepped closer, sensing something was terribly wrong. One guard reached toward us, but the king silently lifted a hand to stop him. He kept staring at the twins instead. His gaze lingered on the silver streak hidden in Noah's dark hair, then on Liam's unusual amber eyes, the same rare eyes every member of the royal bloodline carried. My worst nightmare had just become real. 5 years of hiding could collapse inside a crowded marketplace. "Who are they?" he asked quietly. I lowered my head, forcing my voice to stay calm. "Children who made a mistake." I grabbed both boys' hands and turned away before either of them could speak again. Behind me, boots struck the stone road. He wasn't letting us leave. 5 years earlier, I had walked toward him wearing white, believing I was about to become his mate before the entire kingdom. Instead, I watched him remove the royal engagement ring from my finger without touching my hand. This marriage ends here. No explanation. No mercy. No second glance. The crowd whispered while I stood alone beneath the palace banners. I remembered none of the applause that came before. I only remembered how cold my hands felt when I realized there was nowhere left to go. I never told him that morning that I was already carrying our children. I never returned after leaving the palace gates. The boys tugged gently on my sleeves, pulling me back to the present. "Daddy," Noah whispered. "Did we do something bad?" I forced a smile that felt like breaking glass. "No, you were wonderful." But the Alpha King was still following us. He kept a respectful distance, yet every step behind us carried more weight than chains. He wasn't chasing fugitives. He was chasing answers. We crossed the bridge leading toward the quiet district where we lived, but before I could disappear into the narrow streets, his voice reached me again. "Please." That single word stopped me more effectively than any royal command ever could. 5 years ago, he had spoken like a king. Today, he sounded like a man who had just discovered a hole in his own life. I didn't turn around. "You have the wrong family." "Then why?" he asked, his voice almost breaking. "Does one of your sons wear my mother's crest around his neck?" My hand instinctively flew to Noah's collar. Hidden beneath his shirt rested a tiny silver pendant I had believed no one would ever notice. My blood ran cold. Noah looked up at me with confused eyes before touching the necklace. "Daddy said it belonged to someone important." I closed my eyes for one painful heartbeat. There was no running now. The Alpha King had seen the pendant. He had seen the boys. And judging by the look on his face, he had just begun remembering something about the wedding day that neither of us had spoken aloud for 5 long years. The Alpha King didn't stop following us. He never raised his voice, never ordered his guards to seize me. Yet every measured step behind us carried the weight of a royal command. I tightened my grip on Noah and Liam's hands as we hurried through the narrow streets. "Daddy," Liam whispered, looking back over his shoulder. "Why is that man looking at us like he's sad?" I couldn't answer. If I opened my mouth, I was afraid the truth would spill out before I was ready. The silver pendant still rested against Noah's chest beneath his shirt, and I cursed myself for letting him wear the only piece of the past I had failed to bury. "Please stop," the Alpha King called again. This time I did, not because I wanted to hear him, but because the boys were beginning to notice the fear I had tried to hide from them for 5 years. I turned slowly. "Your Majesty." The title tasted as cold as the day he rejected me. His guards remained several steps behind, waiting for a signal that never came. The king looked nothing like the ruthless Alpha who had stood beneath the wedding arch. His shoulders were rigid, his breathing uneven, and his eyes never left my sons. "That pendant," he said quietly. "Where did your child get it?" Noah instinctively covered it with his hand. "Daddy gave it to me." The king swallowed hard before looking at me. "That crest belonged to my mother. There were only 2 made." My heart sank. I had always believed no one outside the palace would recognize such a small emblem after so many years. I had been wrong. People collect old things, I replied. Sometimes they end up in markets. Even to my own ears, the excuse sounded weak. The king's eyes narrowed, not with anger, but with confusion. No, my mother gave the second pendant to someone the morning of my wedding. His words hit me harder than any accusation. For a moment, the sounds of the street disappeared. I remembered an older Omega embracing me before the ceremony, fastening the silver pendant around my neck with trembling hands. "Whatever happens today," she had whispered, "remember that someone in this palace believed you already belonged to our family." I had hidden the pendant after leaving the palace, promising myself my children would never know where it came from. Yet Noah had found it months ago in an old wooden box and begged to wear it because he thought it looked like a knight's medal. "Daddy," Noah looked up at me again. "Did I do something wrong?" I knelt beside him and forced a gentle smile. "No, none of this is your fault." Before I could stand, the Alpha King surprised me. He lowered himself to one knee as well, bringing himself to the twins' eye level instead of towering over them like a ruler. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "I'm Noah." "And I'm Liam." Liam answered proudly before I could stop him. "We're twins." The king's expression cracked for the first time. His gaze lingered on their matching smiles, then drifted toward their birthdays stitched onto the small name tags inside their school bags hanging over their shoulders. His eyes widened. 5 years. Exactly 5 years. His lips parted as though a terrifying calculation had just finished inside his mind. I saw the instant suspicion turned into something far more dangerous. "Hope, how old are you?" he asked. 5. Liam replied cheerfully, holding up all his fingers. Noah copied him with a grin. I immediately pulled them closer. "That's enough." The king stood, but instead of stepping toward us, he took one slow step back. His face had gone pale. 5 years, he murmured to himself. "The wedding, 5 years." Then he looked directly at me. "Were you already pregnant that day?" The question cut deeper than the rejection ever had. Every painful memory I had locked away threatened to break free. I could still remember standing alone outside the palace gates after the ceremony collapsed, one hand resting unconsciously over my stomach while convincing myself the tiny lives inside me would never need the man who had abandoned us. I had repeated that lie every day since then. "You don't have the right to ask me that," I said quietly. "Maybe I don't," he admitted, "but I need the truth." Before I could answer, one of the royal guards hurried toward the king, lowering his voice. "Your Majesty, the council is waiting. The emergency session cannot begin without you." The king didn't even glance at the guard. His attention remained fixed on me. "Delay it." The guard froze in disbelief. Royal council meetings had never been postponed for anyone, not even foreign kings. The king ignored the stunned silence around him. "Nothing is more important than this." My pulse quickened. 5 years ago, he had chosen the crown over me without hesitation. Today, for the first time, he had chosen something else. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, fear settled even deeper inside my chest, because if he truly started searching for the truth now, he wouldn't stop until he uncovered everything that had happened on the day our wedding was destroyed. The first thing I did after the Alpha King delayed the council was run. Not with my feet, because the guards would have noticed that too quickly, but with my voice, my posture, my hands on my son's shoulders as I turned them away from him and said, "We're going home." Noah and Liam obeyed, but both kept glancing back. Children sensed storms before adults admitted they were coming. The king did not follow us this time. That should have comforted me. Instead, it frightened me more. A man chasing you could be escaped. A king who stopped moving had begun thinking. By the time we reached our small apartment above the closed flower shop, my hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the key. Liam rushed to the window before I could stop him. "Daddy, the night man is still outside." My blood went cold. Across the street, beneath the rain-dark awning of the bakery, one royal guard stood watching our door. Not threatening, not hiding, waiting. That was worse. I pulled the curtains shut. Noah touched the silver pendant through his shirt. Did he know Grandma? The question nearly broke me. I had never told them about the palace, the wedding, or the woman who had blessed me with shaking hands before her son destroyed me. "He knew someone who owned it," I said carefully. "That's all." But Noah was quiet in the way he became when he knew I was not telling the whole truth. He looked too much like Adrian when he thought deeply. That resemblance had always been easiest to ignore in the dark. Under daylight, with the king's eyes now searching for it, It felt like evidence written across my children's faces. I sent the boys to wash up, then opened the old wooden box hidden under the loose floorboard beneath my bed. Inside were the only pieces of my past I had kept: a folded wedding program with my name printed beside Adrian's, a white ribbon stained faintly gold from the palace candles, and the letter from the Queen Mother that I had never had the courage to burn. My fingers stopped over the final object: the torn medical certificate from the palace healer, dated the morning after the wedding. Pregnancy confirmed. Estimated early term. Twin indicators possible. I had carried that paper out of the palace beneath my coat, while the entire kingdom believed I left from shame alone. The knock came before I could hide the box. 3 soft taps. Not a royal command. Not a threat. A request. I shoved everything beneath a blanket and opened the door only a crack. Adrian stood there without his crown, rain clinging to his dark hair, his royal coat soaked at the shoulders. No guards crowded behind him. He had come alone. That small fact unsettled me more than an army would have. "I won't enter unless you allow it," he said. "Then stay outside." Pain flashed across his face, but he accepted it. I spoke with the palace archivist. My breath caught. That was fast. When a king asks why his own wedding records were sealed, people answer quickly. The hallway seemed to shrink around us. Sealed. I had not known that. I had assumed the palace erased me because rejection was cleaner than scandal. Adrian's jaw tightened. The official transcript from that day is missing. A cold pressure spread through my chest. That has nothing to do with me. Maybe not. But the witness list was altered. I gripped the doorframe. This was no longer just suspicion about my sons. This was the wedding reaching out from 5 years ago with fingers made of paper and lies. Behind me, Noah and Liam burst from the washroom, arguing over a towel. They froze when they saw Adrian. Liam smiled first. Father came back. The word landed between us again, but this time there was no crowd to soften it. Only a narrow hallway, rain dripping from Adrian's sleeves, and my 2 sons staring at a man they did not understand. Adrian closed his eyes as if the word hurt him. When he opened them, his gaze moved past me for one brief second and landed on the blanket covering the open box. I stepped into his line of sight too late. He had already seen the edge of the wedding program. My name. His name. Printed together like a life we never got to live. "Ethan," he whispered, and it was the first time in 5 years he had said my name like it still belonged in his mouth. "What did you take from the palace that night?" My throat tightened. The boys fell silent behind me. I realized then that hiding the truth was no longer protecting them. It was turning our home into another locked room full of secrets. But before I could answer, Adrian reached slowly into his coat and removed something wrapped in black cloth. He unfolded it with careful hands. Inside lay the other silver pendant, identical to Noah's, split down the center by a deep scratch. "My mother was found holding this after the wedding," he said. "She tried to tell me something before she died. I never understood what." The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. The Queen Mother had not simply blessed me that morning. She had known something, and whatever she had tried to reveal had been buried with her for 5 years. I stared at the scratched silver pendant in Adrian's hand and realized that the dead were beginning to speak louder than the living. The Queen Mother had never been a careless woman. If she had clutched that pendant until her final breath, then whatever message she tried to leave behind had been important enough to die protecting. My throat tightened. "You should go," I whispered. "The boys don't need to hear this." Adrian didn't argue. Instead, he looked toward Noah and Liam, who were peeking nervously from behind the hallway wall. His expression softened with a tenderness I had never seen on our wedding day. "Would you 2 mind giving your dad a few minutes?" Noah hesitated before nodding. Liam obediently followed his brother into their room, but not before glancing back one last time. "Don't make Daddy cry," he said innocently. The words struck Adrian like a blade. After the bedroom door clicked shut, silence settled between us. Rain drummed against the apartment windows while the city outside continued as though our lives weren't unraveling. Adrian carefully placed the damaged pendant beside Noah's matching one on the small kitchen table. Together, they formed a complete crest. My pulse quickened. They had been designed to fit together. "I never noticed that," Adrian murmured. "Because no one was supposed to." The answer escaped before I could stop it. His eyes lifted immediately. "So you knew?" I closed mine for a brief second. Another mistake. Another piece of the wall collapsing. Adrian reached into his coat again and removed a worn leather folder sealed with the Royal Archives wax mark. "After leaving your door, I ordered every document related to our wedding brought to me. He spread several papers across the table. Most records are intact. Guest lists, security reports, ceremony preparations. His voice hardened. Only 3 things disappeared. I looked down despite myself. The healer's report, the officiant's signed transcript, and the Queen Mother's personal statement. My stomach twisted violently. Those were not random documents. Those were the only records capable of explaining everything. Adrian watched my face carefully. You already knew they existed. It wasn't a question. I didn't answer. He exhaled slowly. 5 years ago, I believed you simply left after I rejected the bond. He paused. Now I'm beginning to think someone wanted me to believe exactly that. A chill crept down my spine. I remembered fragments I had buried for years. Palace servants whispering behind closed doors. Guards suddenly changing shifts moments before the ceremony. The Queen Mother insisting on seeing me alone before I walked into the grand hall. At the time, none of it had made sense. Now every memory felt like a loose thread waiting to be pulled. Adrian unfolded one final document. Unlike the others, this page wasn't official. It was a handwritten note copied from the Queen Mother's private journal. The original had vanished. Only the archivist's transcription remained. He quietly read the final sentence aloud. If the ceremony is interrupted, protect the child before protecting the crown. My breathing stopped. Child. Singular. She had written that before anyone except the palace healer could have known about my pregnancy. Adrian lowered the page slowly. There shouldn't have been any child. His voice cracked. Not unless. He couldn't finish the sentence. Neither could I. Because if the Queen Mother had known about the pregnancy before the ceremony, then someone else inside the palace probably knew as well. Someone with enough influence to erase medical records, remove witness statements, and rewrite the official history of the royal wedding. The problem was no longer whether Adrian believed me. The problem was discovering who had spent 5 years making sure he never would. A sharp knock interrupted the silence. 3 rapid strikes. This time they carried authority. Adrian opened the door before I could move. Standing outside was Captain Rowan, commander of the Royal Guard. His normally disciplined expression had given way to visible concern. Your Majesty, he said quietly, we searched the archive vault after your order. Adrian's eyes narrowed. And Rowan swallowed once before answering. Someone broke into the restricted records chamber less than an hour before we arrived. My heart pounded. Adrian's voice turned dangerously calm. What was taken? Rowan looked directly at me before returning his gaze to the king. Everything connected to the wedding 5 years ago. The apartment fell silent. Whoever had hidden the truth all these years had just learned that Adrian was searching for it. They weren't covering old tracks anymore. They were destroying evidence in real time. Adrian slowly folded the copied journal page and slipped it into his pocket. Then he looked at me with an expression unlike anything I had ever seen in his eyes. Not suspicion, not regret, but certainty. Ethan, he said quietly, someone stole 5 years from both of us. Before I could respond, Noah suddenly burst out of his room, clutching a crayon drawing. Daddy, he cried. I remembered where I saw the lady wearing the same necklace. Every adult in the room froze. Noah held up the drawing with complete innocence. In the corner, sketched in uneven blue lines, stood a smiling woman wearing the matching pendant beside a stained glass window I recognized instantly. It wasn't inside the palace. It was inside the abandoned chapel where Adrian and I were supposed to exchange our vows before everything fell apart. Noah's drawing changed everything. The abandoned chapel had not appeared in any official wedding record, not once. Yet my son had drawn its stained glass window in the exact shade of blue I remembered from the morning my life split in two. Adrian took the paper from Noah with hands that were far too careful for a king. Where did you see this woman? He asked, keeping his voice gentle. Noah pointed at the pendant around his neck. In my dream, he said. She told me the broken king forgot the wrong promise. My blood turned cold. Adrian's face went utterly still. Captain Rowan stepped forward, but Adrian raised one hand. No one spoke for several seconds. Then Liam, still half hidden behind the bedroom door, whispered, She comes when Noah cries. I pulled both boys against me before anyone could ask another question. They're children, I said sharply. They imagine things. Adrian did not look convinced. He stared at the drawing as if it were a door opening beneath his feet. The chapel was sealed after the wedding, he said. No public image of that window exists. That was the first crack in my denial. The second came when he unfolded the scratched pendant beside Noah's. Together, the crest formed not just the royal emblem, but a phrase engraved along the inner rim. I had never noticed it because each pendant held only half. Adrian read it aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. Blood before crown. Truth before throne. The Queen Mother had not given us jewelry. She had given us a message broken in two. Within the hour, we stood outside the abandoned chapel under a sky heavy with rain. I had sworn never to return, but my sons clung to my coat, and Adrian walked ahead without his crown, carrying Noah's drawing like evidence in a trial against his own memory. The chapel doors were chained, yet Captain Rowan produced an old guard key. The lock gave way with a groan. Dust rolled out like breath from a tomb. Inside, the stained glass windows still glowed faintly blue despite the gray daylight. Noah tightened his small fingers around mine. That's where the lady stood. Adrian stopped beneath the shattered altar. His gaze moved across the aisle, toward the place where he had once waited for me. I remembered walking toward him in white. I remembered the music stopping. I remembered his eyes turning cold before he said the words that ended us. But now, standing in the same room, I saw something I had forgotten. The royal healer had not been near the altar when the ceremony began. He had stood beside the council pews, pale and trembling, clutching a sealed document. Adrian saw him in the memory too. His face changed. Dr. Vane, he murmured. He disappeared that night. Rowan moved toward the side chamber. Your Majesty. Behind a cracked wooden panel, hidden where the Queen Mother's private prayer alcove had once stood, was a narrow metal box sealed with black wax. The crest on it belonged to the late Queen. Adrian broke it open. Inside lay three things: the original healer's report, the officiant's transcript, and a letter written in the Queen Mother's hand. I could not breathe. Adrian read the healer's report first. His eyes moved once, twice, then stopped. His hands began to shake. Pregnancy confirmed before ceremony, he whispered. Twin indicators probable. My knees weakened, but I forced myself to remain standing. There it was. The truth I had carried alone for 5 years, now written in ink no one could call grief or manipulation. Adrian looked at me, and whatever remained of the distance between us seemed to collapse. You were pregnant, he said, not as a question, but as a wound finally opening. I looked away. Yes. The single word filled the chapel like a bell. Liam pressed his face into my coat. Noah did not understand why everyone had gone silent, only that something terrible had been named. Adrian unfolded the officiant's transcript next. The official version claimed he rejected me freely before the vows. But the Real transcript told another story. Before the ceremony, the council had received a sealed accusation claiming I had been bonded to another alpha and that the child I carried was not royal. The law demanded an immediate rejection until the accusation was examined. Adrian's face drained of color. I was told there was proof, he said. His voice broke over the last word. They told me if I completed the bond, the crown would declare you guilty of treason and take the child. My chest tightened so sharply I almost staggered. For 5 years, I had believed he rejected me because I was not enough. But he had been forced to choose between humiliating me publicly and watching the palace destroy me privately. It did not erase the pain. It did not return the years. But it changed the shape of the knife. Then Adrian opened the Queen Mother's letter. His mother had written that the accusation was false, that someone on the council had forged the evidence, and that if she failed to stop the ceremony, I must be protected before the throne. At the bottom was one final line. Adrian must never trust Lord Cashin with the wedding records. Captain Rowan inhaled sharply. Lord Cashin was the current head of the Royal Council, the man who had stood beside Adrian for 5 years, guiding every decision after the Queen Mother's death. Adrian folded the letter with terrifying calm. Cashin knew. At that exact moment, the chapel doors slammed shut behind us. From outside came the sound of multiple boots locking into position. Rowan drew his blade. The boys whimpered against me. Adrian stepped in front of us. No crown, no throne, only an alpha shielding the family he had lost before he ever knew they existed. Then Lord Cashin's voice echoed through the sealed chapel. Your Majesty, step away from the Omega and the illegitimate children. Adrian's eyes turned lethal, but he did not move. For the first time in 5 years, he chose us before the crown. Lord Cashin's words echoed through the abandoned chapel like poison. Step away from the Omega and the illegitimate children. The guards outside tightened their formation, steel scraping against steel as Captain Rowan instinctively moved in front of the entrance. Adrian never looked away from Cashin. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life," he said quietly. Cashin laughed once, slow and confident. "No, Your Majesty. The mistake was letting you find those documents." The chapel doors swung open, revealing half a dozen council guards wearing the royal crest. They looked like men serving the throne, yet every sword pointed toward the king instead of protecting him. Noah gripped my hand so tightly his small fingers hurt. Liam hid behind my leg, his frightened breathing reminding me that no matter how much palace politics surrounded us, my first duty was still the same as it had been 5 years ago. Keep my sons alive. Adrian took one deliberate step until he stood between us and every drawn weapon. "Rowan," he said without taking his eyes off Cashin, "escort Ethan and the boys out through the east passage." Rowan didn't move. "There are no soldiers stationed there anymore, Your Majesty." Cashin smiled. "Because I removed them years ago." Adrian's expression hardened. "You planned this." "I planned many things," Cashin replied, "including your wedding." My pulse stopped for a heartbeat. The confession came so calmly that even the guards exchanged uneasy glances. Adrian's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Explain." Cashin folded his hands behind his back as though addressing the royal council, instead of standing inside a ruined chapel. The kingdom could never afford an Omega with no powerful bloodline becoming its future monarch. Your mother disagreed. She believed strength came from loyalty. His smile disappeared. She was becoming a liability. Every word struck harder than the last. "The accusation against Ethan," Adrian said. "You forged it." "Of course." Cashin sounded almost amused. "One forged medical report. One anonymous witness. One frightened council. You did exactly what every Alpha King before you would have done. You protected the crown." Adrian closed his eyes for one painful second. When he opened them again, I saw something had changed forever. 5 years ago, he had believed he sacrificed our happiness for his kingdom. Now he knew he had been manipulated into destroying his own family. "And my mother?" he asked. Cashin remained silent. That silence answered everything. Rowan slowly drew his sword. "You murdered the queen." Several council guards hesitated. They had expected an arrest, not treason. Cashin noticed it immediately. "Careful, Captain. Every man standing behind me answers to the council treasury, not the palace." Adrian finally turned toward me. "Ethan." His voice was calm despite the chaos around us. "Look at me." I did. "I'm sorry." 2 simple words. 5 years too late. Yet there was no excuse hidden inside them. No attempt to justify what he had done. Only regret. "I failed you." Tears burned behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "Sorry doesn't give our sons their father back." He nodded once. "I know." Then, before anyone could react, Adrian removed the royal signet ring from his finger and handed it to Captain Rowan. The entire chapel froze. Even Cashin's confidence flickered. "Your Majesty," Rowan whispered. "By authority of the Alpha King," Adrian declared, his voice filling the chapel, "I temporarily relinquish all ceremonial powers to the Royal Guard commander until this conspiracy is investigated." Gasps erupted among the soldiers. No king had ever surrendered his own authority voluntarily. Cashin's face finally betrayed genuine alarm. "You can't do that." Adrian met his gaze steadily. "I already did." The balance of power shifted in a single moment. Every guard now had to choose whether loyalty belonged to the council that paid them or the king who had willingly placed justice above his own throne. 2 soldiers stepped away from Cashin. Then another. Finally, only 3 remained at his side. Cashin's calm mask cracked. "Fools," he hissed. "Without me, this kingdom falls apart." "No," Adrian answered. "Without you, it finally has a chance to heal." Cashin's hand slipped beneath his cloak. Rowan shouted a warning just as a concealed blade flashed through the air. Adrian turned instinctively, taking the strike across his shoulder instead of letting it reach Noah, who had been standing directly behind him. Blood spread rapidly across his white shirt. Liam screamed. Noah dropped to his knees beside Adrian, tears pouring down his face. "Father," he cried without thinking. The entire chapel fell silent. Adrian ignored the blood soaking through his sleeve. Instead, he looked at Noah with eyes full of disbelief and unbearable tenderness. Slowly, despite the pain, he reached out and rested one trembling hand on the boy's head. "I'm here," he whispered. "And this time, I'm not leaving." At that exact moment, bells began ringing across the capital. Not wedding bells. Emergency bells. Rowan looked toward the chapel doors, his face pale. Your Majesty, he said grimly. Someone has just announced to the entire kingdom that the Alpha King has been assassinated. The emergency bells turned the capital into a beast waking from sleep. Their iron voices rolled through the chapel walls, through the rain, through my bones, announcing a lie loud enough to become truth if we did not move. The Alpha King was bleeding in front of me, alive, breathing, his hand still resting on Noah's trembling head, while the kingdom outside mourned a death that had not happened. Assassinated, I whispered. Captain Rowan's face was grim. If Cashin controls the announcement towers, he controls the first story the people hear. Cashin, pinned by 2 guards near the altar, smiled through blood on his lip. A kingdom without a king needs a council. A frightened kingdom obeys faster. Adrian tried to stand. Pain ripped across his face, but he swallowed it down and looked at me instead of Rowan. Take the boys somewhere safe. 5 years ago, he had made a decision without me and called it protection. This time, I heard the same danger in his voice, and the old wound inside me opened like a scar under rain. No, I said. Every person in the chapel turned toward me, even Adrian. I pulled Noah and Liam behind me, then stepped closer to the man who had once rejected me in front of a kingdom and now wanted to bleed alone for us. You do not get to choose for me again. His expression broke, not because I was cruel, but because I had finally named the shape of the damage. Ethan, if we run, Cashin wins. If you hide, the boys spend their whole lives as another secret. Liam clutched the back of my coat. Noah was crying silently, his small face pale as he stared at the blood on Adrian's sleeve. I knelt in front of them, forcing my voice to stay steady. Listen to me. Nothing that happens next is your fault. Do you understand? They nodded, though neither looked convinced. Adrian's breathing sharpened. They shouldn't see this. They already saw enough, I said. They saw you choose us. The words landed harder than I expected. Adrian looked down at the blood staining his shirt, then at Noah, then at Liam. Something in him shifted from regret into resolve. Rowan moved to the chapel doors. There is a service tunnel beneath the east crypt. It leads near the announcement square. Cashin laughed bitterly. You think the people will believe a wounded king dragging a disgraced Omega and 2 bastards into the square? Adrian's growl filled the chapel, low and lethal, but I raised a hand before he could move. No, I said, looking at Cashin. They will believe the Queen Mother. His smile died. I turned toward Noah. The drawing. Do you still have it? Noah nodded and pulled the crumpled paper from his coat pocket. The chapel window. The pendant. The woman who came when he cried. Then I crossed to the altar and picked up the Queen Mother's letter, the healer's report, and the split pendants. My hands shook, but not from fear this time. For 5 years, I had protected my sons by hiding. Now the only way to protect them was to reveal everything. We moved through the crypt in near darkness, Rowan leading with a lantern, Adrian leaning on one guard but refusing to be carried. Every few steps, the bells thundered above us, repeating the same lie. King dead. Crown unstable. Council in control. Liam walked between me and Adrian, holding both our hands without asking permission. The touch was so simple it almost destroyed me. At the tunnel's end, voices roared from the square. Hundreds of people had gathered under the rain, staring up at the announcement balcony, where Cashin's loyal herald declared that enemies of the crown had murdered the Alpha King. Adrian swayed beside me. If I step out now, they will try again. Then don't step out as the king, I said. He looked at me. I pressed Noah's pendant into his uninjured hand and held up the matching broken one. Step out as the father they tried to erase. For one breath, he could not speak. Then he nodded. Rowan shoved open the iron gate. Rain exploded over us as we entered the square. The crowd turned. Gasps spread first, then screams. Adrian, pale and bleeding, walked forward without crown or cloak, one hand gripping the pendant, the other holding Liam's small fingers. I walked beside him with Noah and the Queen Mother's letter pressed against my chest. The herald fell silent. On the balcony above, Lord Cashin appeared between 2 guards, his face twisting with fury. Adrian lifted his voice, but pain stole the first word. I stepped forward instead. For 5 years, I had believed my silence kept my children safe. Now I understood silence had protected only the liar. Your queen knew the truth, I shouted into the rain. And your council buried it. The square went still. I raised the letter. Noah, trembling, lifted his drawing. Liam looked at Adrian and whispered, Father, Are we in trouble? Adrian's answer carried across the square, broken but clear. No, son. For the first time, we are done hiding. Above us, Cashin drew a guard's sword and pointed it directly at my children. Cashin's sword never reached my children. Before the blade could descend from the balcony, 3 royal guards seized his arm at once. The steel slipped from his fingers and clattered across the stone railing, but the damage had already been done. Hundreds of people in the square had witnessed the head of the royal council pointing a weapon at 2 frightened 5-year-old boys, while their wounded king stood between them. Silence swept through the crowd more quickly than panic ever could. Adrian drew a slow breath despite the blood soaking through his shoulder. He did not look at Cashin. He looked at the people. You were told I was dead, he called, his voice rough but steady. Instead, I stand before you with the family that was stolen from me. Murmurs rippled through the square. Some recognized me from 5 years ago. Others stared only at Noah and Liam, whose matching amber eyes reflected the same royal bloodline no rumor could erase. I stepped forward before fear could silence me again. My hands shook as I unfolded the Queen Mother's letter. This was written before she died, I said loudly. She ordered that my child be protected before the crown because she already knew the accusation against me was false. Captain Rowan took the letter from my hands and raised the royal seal for everyone to see. I served Her Majesty for 23 years, he declared. This is her handwriting. This is her seal. I swear it before the kingdom. The crowd erupted into whispers. Cashin struggled against the guards holding him. Forged, he shouted. Everything is forged. Adrian finally lifted the healer's report high enough for those closest to see the royal signature at the bottom. Then explain this. His voice grew stronger with every word. 5 years ago, the palace healer confirmed Ethan was carrying my children before our wedding ceremony began. Faces turned toward Cashin. The confidence that had surrounded him moments ago began to dissolve beneath hundreds of questioning eyes. An elderly woman stepped from the front of the crowd. I worked in the palace kitchens, she cried. I remember the Queen Mother dismissing everyone because she wanted to speak privately with the young Omega before the ceremony. Another voice answered from farther back. I was one of the musicians. The council interrupted the wedding before the vows. Then another, and another. Memories long buried beneath official history began surfacing one after another. Cashin's greatest weapon had always been silence. The moment ordinary people started speaking, that weapon broke apart. His face twisted with desperation. Arrest them, he screamed at the remaining loyal guards. None of them moved. Instead, one by one, they lowered their weapons. Rowan stepped forward and removed the royal signet ring Adrian had entrusted to him earlier. Kneeling before the wounded king in full view of the kingdom, he held it out with both hands. Your Majesty, he said clearly, the royal guard recognizes only one lawful sovereign. Adrian looked at the ring for a long moment before shaking his head. Not yet. Rowan frowned in confusion. Adrian turned toward Noah and Liam instead. Their frightened eyes met his. Slowly, carefully, he knelt despite the pain in his shoulder until he was no taller than they were. 5 years ago, he said, his voice trembling. I failed before I ever became your father. Noah's lips quivered. Liam held tightly to my coat. Adrian continued. Today I cannot ask either of you to forgive me. I haven't earned that. But I can promise you one thing. He placed the royal signet ring on the wet stone between himself and the twins instead of wearing it. From this moment forward, no throne will ever matter more to me than the two of you. The entire square fell silent. The gesture stunned everyone because every person present understood its meaning. An Alpha King had publicly placed the symbol of his crown beneath the promise he was making to his children. I looked at the man kneeling in the rain and realized he was no longer asking me to believe he had changed. He was proving it in front of an entire kingdom. Noah took one hesitant step forward. He picked up the signet ring with both hands and looked at me as if asking permission. Tears blurred my vision. But this time, they were not born from the wedding I had lost. They came from seeing my sons offered something I had stopped believing was possible. I nodded once. Noah walked to Adrian and placed the ring back into his father's hand. Mommy said fathers keep promises, he whispered softly. So don't break this one. Adrian closed his fingers around the ring, but did not put it on. Instead, he pulled Noah into a careful embrace, mindful of his injured shoulder. Liam rushed forward a heartbeat later, wrapping both arms around Adrian's waist. I watched the three of them together, and for the first time since the wedding, I saw not the king who had rejected me, but the father who had chosen his children before his crown. Then Captain Rowan's voice cut through the emotion. Your Majesty. Every face turned toward him. He held up another sealed document taken from Cashin's robes during the arrest. This is an execution order. My heart stopped. Rowan slowly broke the seal and read the first line aloud. By authority of the Royal Council. Ethan and both royal heirs are to be eliminated immediately if the truth of the wedding is ever revealed. The square erupted in horror. Adrian's embrace tightened instinctively around Noah and Liam. His eyes lifted to mine across the rain, filled not with regret anymore, but with absolute certainty. This ends today, he said quietly. Not because I'm your king, but because I'm finally their father. The execution order turned the square against Cashin more completely than any speech ever could. Horror moved through the crowd like wind over a field. First whispers, then outrage, then a rising roar as people understood what the council had planned to do to two children who had never asked to be born royal. Adrian did not shout over them. He simply stood in the rain with Noah and Liam pressed against him, blood on his sleeve, the signet ring still closed inside his fist. For the first time since I had known him, he looked less like a king commanding a kingdom and more like a father learning the true cost of silence. Captain Rowan ordered Cashin taken into custody under the authority of the Royal Guard and the testimony of the Queen Mother's sealed letter. Cashin fought until he saw that even his own guards would not meet his eyes. As they dragged him from the balcony, his voice cracked through the rain. You will destroy the throne for an Omega. Adrian looked up at him, calm and pale. No, you nearly destroyed it because you forgot what it was meant to protect. The crowd fell silent. Then Adrian turned to me. In front of the kingdom, with no council shield, no crown, and no polished royal distance between us, he lowered his head. Ethan, he said, his voice carrying just enough for the front rows to hear. 5 years ago, I made a choice without trusting you. Even if I was deceived, the pain you carried was real. The years you lost were real. The sons I failed to protect were real. My throat tightened. The old wound inside me, the one that had whispered for years that I had not been worth choosing, trembled under the weight of words I had once begged to hear. But apology was not the same as healing. And I was no longer the Omega abandoned at the altar, waiting for a king to decide my worth. I took Noah and Liam's hands and stepped closer. If you want to be part of their lives, I said, my voice shaking but clear, it will not be because the bloodline demands it. It will not be because the kingdom needs heirs. It will be because you show up. Every day, without taking choices away from us. Adrian's eyes shone in the rain. I understand. No, I said softly. You're beginning to. Something like pain crossed his face, but he nodded. That was the first answer that did not feel like a command. Rowan returned the signet ring to him, but Adrian did not place it back on his finger until he knelt before the twins again. May I? He asked them. Not the crowd. Not me. Them. Noah looked at Liam. Liam looked at me. I nodded, not because the past had vanished, but because fear no longer got to choose for us. Noah took Adrian's hand and slid the ring onto his finger. Liam leaned closer, touching the silver pendant at his brother's neck, then pointed to the scratched one in Adrian's palm. They match, he whispered. Adrian smiled through tears. They were always meant to. Weeks later, the abandoned chapel was opened again, not for a royal wedding, but for a public memorial to the Queen Mother and the truth she had died trying to protect. The blue stained glass had been cleaned. The altar remained cracked, because I asked for it to stay that way. Some things should not be hidden just because they hurt. The kingdom watched as Adrian placed both silver pendants beneath the window, side by side, the broken crest finally whole. Noah stood on my left, Liam on my right, both dressed in simple white shirts instead of royal ceremonial robes. Adrian had offered them crowns. They had chosen flower pins from the shop beneath our old apartment instead. I loved them more for that. When the ceremony ended, Adrian approached us slowly, stopping at a respectful distance. He had learned that closeness was not something he could take. It had to be given. Liam ran first. Noah followed a second later. They collided with him so hard he nearly staggered, and both boys laughed as his arms closed around them. Father! They called together, not because of a portrait, not because of a mistake, not because a crowd expected it, but because the word finally belonged to them. Adrian closed his eyes, holding them like a man receiving a miracle he knew he had not earned but would spend his life protecting. I stood beneath the same blue window where my future had once shattered and felt the past loosen its grip. 5 years ago, I had left a wedding believing rejection was the end of my story. Now, watching my sons pull their father toward me with bright, fearless smiles, I understood that. Recognition did not erase rejection. It answered it. Adrian stopped before me, not reaching, not demanding, just waiting. This time, I was the one who chose. I took his hand, and the chapel bells rang not for a wedding, not for a crown, but for a family that had finally stepped out of hiding.